In many ways, this is an extremely weird topic and an extremely weird or surprising or unknown angle on this topic. We've been working with sensory methodology for almost 10 years in CoffeeMind. I've been working with coffee roasting for almost 20 years. But 10 years ago, I just had the feeling that it's really important to understand the sensory aspect of what's going on, because that's the point of everything anyway. There was a lot of, as a trainer, I had a lot of things I said, right? I've been training hundreds and hundreds of students at London School of Coffee. And I had my own observations of what happens with development time, and I had a lot of sayings, and I could always convince my students to observe what I observed. But having a scientific background, I was just a bit unsatisfied to just say something and just believe it enough because I tasted it. I know enough about bias and science data to be a bit nervous about that. And then I was asked at the university to help out at a sensory evaluation on food, and that's really where I understood that there's a scientific process to this. And luckily, I met Ida very early, and we started to work together when she was a student. And I just found it so fascinating that there's a real scientific method that can be used when evaluating coffee. And then Ida and I started to, luckily I could, when she graduated, we started a project, and we got the idea to do a PhD in sensory learning. And this is almost 10 years ago. So Ida and I have just been geeking out about sensory methodology and how to do research, or really use the right method. And we can proudly say that on this Monday, Ida is defending the PhD that has been in the making. And we got the idea approximately 10 years ago. So we are just deeply embedded in the sensory methodology. And it's been very frustrating for Ida to teach the curricula in the SCA system because it's very anecdotal. And it's the same for me in roasting. It's very anecdotal. And that's annoying if you're a scientist. You don't want to say something just clear enough and hope that if you're convinced, it's probably true. And if you can convince your students, that proves that you're true. It's not very satisfying as a teacher with a scientific background. So we were very excited when, actually I took the initiative to SCAE's research program in 2013. And then 6 months later, the university at Zurich joined and in many ways took over. So we that's great that there's a lot of people are starting to build bridges to universities and things are going to happen. And then the merger came and I thought, now we have more universities, a bigger kind of community, and everything is just, science is finally coming to the community. That's what we hoped. And we spent a lot of time teaching these things, and it's very close to our heart that this is correct. And then we heard that we started this project 10 years ago, and 3-4 years ago we learned that SCA is starting to do this value assessment where they'll do it scientifically. Oh, that's amazing, and they'll distinguish between discriminative, descriptive, and hedonic, just like Rosemary Pangborn came up with it. And we thought, now finally, it's happening. And then we saw it coming out a year ago, and it was just, what's this? It was a bit weird. looked it through and called, yeah, that's probably better than nothing, and we're going in the right direction. But for this presentation, I really went deep into the methodology, combined with working together with Ida on her dissertation. We worked together on the passage on the science done on the SCA 2004 system, the scientific papers. And unfortunately, after looking deep into that science and into the new CSV module, what we see is tooth fairies and paper piles, not science. And that's very disappointing because we hoped it was different. And I'll explain you why we say that. First, I'll explain you what sensory science is. And I want to explain you the fundamental distinctions of sensory science because they are very intuitive, understandable, and practical, and there's no assumptions you don't understand. And this model proves why sensory science is directly relevant and directly useful for you as small startups if used correctly. It's the perfect model for small startups. And it's such fundamental distinctions that you don't even need any calculator, no numbers. It's basically observing some behavior. And the whole point is that in small businesses you have a dream, right? You've decided a type of company and some customers that you want to address. So you decide your audience. In your business plan, you've decided who do you want to serve. Okay? So that's given. Sensory science can't help you with that. That's business strategy. But once you have decided who you want to make happy, then sensory science kicks in with the perfect model of thinking for product development. So the first thing that sensory science would tell you that, okay, if you need a range, you need coffees that taste different. That's the first thing. And you say, yeah, that's every child could say that. Yeah, it's pretty logical. It's not because it's a bad suggestion. It's just because, of course, right? This is the first thing you need to kind of, coffee. I have a range, so they need to be different. Or if I want to test if they prefer one coffee over another, they also need to be different because they can't prefer one coffee over another if they can't taste the difference. I know this is logical, but please kind of put this in your mind that this is logical, right? It's so logical that there's nothing you don't understand when I say it, right? So that's the first. In sensory science, if you want to test something with different, you need to make sure that there's a big enough difference to what you're testing is relevant. It doesn't make sense to go to the next step where you describe the differences if these are not different, right? And the best way of describing things is just to stick to the categories to make sure, okay, this is fruity, this is chocolatey, and this is spicy, right? There's no assumptions here. If it's clearly spicy and this is clearly fruity, it's not even guessing, right? It's very clear. So, okay, let's say that you have some local hipsters that are looking at coming to your shop once, and then you've got the broader audience, and you also have some older people. Wonder what you should serve them, right? So you can make a small test here. You could do different roast degrees or Robusta, Colombia, and anaerobic or something like that. You could do different tests. So you can see here, this is something you don't need any data here. You can just taste it and make your call. Hey, these are different. This is fruity. Don't even need data for this. You can just make some small notes, right, on a piece of paper. Then you can brew these in thermos, and then you can see which thermo is empty first. That's the winner. No spreadsheet, no statistics, no advanced anything. It's really just handcraft. Taste it, there's a difference, it's relevant for what I want to know. Just a few notes here on how it is and which thermo empty first. That's sensory science. This is the essence of sensory science. So what I just explain now, just contemplate how clear this is, how useful it is, and how simple it is. But the whole point that Rosemary Pangborn kind of came up with, yes it is, but you're only on solid ground if you never mix these. And there's a sequence. First, you need to check if the difference is big enough to be relevant. If it's not, don't waste your time describing it and serving it, because you won't get any good data anyway. Okay, so that's this first. If this is a go, this next, and then of course you want to know this because you want to sell your coffee. So can you see how this is also very useful? It's really practical, and it's important. How do I sell my coffee? Well, that's the coffee that they like best. Okay, that it's easier to sell a coffee if they like it. So why don't you just sell the thermo that empties first? Notice here in this model, there's quality as a word and a concept is completely irrelevant. Depends on what you want to do, right? Depends on your, so quality for whom, right? Quality is not relevant. It's a question about matching up products with the customers that you've decided. So quality is just really confusing. What do you mean quality? Well, there's this form you can fill out and say, yeah, but my customers don't understand the number. And what do you mean quality? There must be differences, right? No, there's a linear. What do you mean about this? It's only sidetracking you. So it seems like this concept of quality is more like an organization's need to kind of control how you're working, but their need for control is not your need, right? What you need success with your customers, and you don't need somebody to make it more difficult for you to get success with your numbers by introducing a concept like quality that is just very vague. Can you see everything we talked about is very clear. What's the purpose? What is it? Quality. What assumptions for whom? There's so many things you don't understand about this, and the second you're confused, you can't make any good decisions. So can you see how it's weird that quality doesn't enter as a concept other than confusing in an otherwise very clear model? Is it okay until now? Any weird stuff? So it's not because we are afraid of statistics. So of course, what I just said can just be really, you can really put a lot of exceptional, well-designed different types of tests to see if there are differences or not. And triangulation is just one of them. There's several ways of testing if something is different or not, if people can taste the difference. This is our software when we do the triangulation in CoffeeMind. We also have a software if we want to describe the differences, multivariate statistics from the highest shelf. And then there's something called PLS models where you can load the data from the descriptive analysis and in to see what features is driving the liking of different customer segments. So it's not because we are afraid of all these numbers. It's just the numbers is not the fundament. The fundament is your understanding of the fundamental ideas, distinctions, and concepts in sensory science. And then you can add all this once it's clear what you want to do, because the numbers are building up the clarity of the simplicity of the model. Okay, so if I started with this and explaining this, it would have been a bit, right? This is where you get the understanding. Once you understand it, then we can build all the advanced statistics on top of it. Okay. So, what to do instead? Well, for us, it's pretty simple. Oh, and I forgot to distribute these. I have brought these for you to take home, a few copies of these. But for us, it's a question about, okay, if we have some different samples, if we want to select something, we would need to have some descriptive data, and it doesn't need to be these at all. Doesn't need to be. We can just kind of score the coffees. Is it high in fruitiness, low in fruitiness, high in dried fruit, low in dried fruit? What about the basic taste? And then what we score. So we try to describe them as good as possible, and then we score the purpose. We score the suitability, which is reflected into the purpose, which comes from the strategy and the goal. So, and this is something that comes from the business strategy. So what you can see, and so this is what we do, but this is not a universal scale. This is all scorings that is relative to the samples that we have decided is relevant to our purpose. So recently I did this with Café Continent on the Ivory Coast. We needed to make to match the flavor of a coffee. So what we did was we got the coffee that we need to match it, and we tried to score it here. And then I got all his green coffees, so I could screen for candidates. I just needed to know how it matched the coffee that we were trying to mimic. So I got all of these and then scored the different coffees. But you can see I don't need to fill out all of them. I just need to fill out the relevant ones that makes the relevant difference between. So that's also, I don't like paper shuffling, and paper shuffling is asking you to add data you don't understand and don't need. So here it's just we wanted to track chocolatey nuttiness because that was the relevant differences between the samples. So we just scored all of them. And then once we've scored them as good as we could descriptively, we just found the ones that we found most suitable. We took the most suitable ones, and the ones that was not suitable at all, of course, we ditched them. So you can see no advanced statistics, just common sense. I know the purpose, and I have some coffees in front of me. So I just score the intensity between them. I'm not thinking about universal scales here. I don't care about what something should be. It be a 6 on a fruity scale or whatever. It's completely irrelevant to me. I don't need the bureaucracy of somebody else's opinion. I'm old enough to make my own opinion. I have a plan with my products and my customers. I can make my own decisions. And just having notes like this is what you need. That said, because we can, and because I was working on the new software, we also did a descriptive analysis. So we were checking. You can see this was the goal. So we did I don't want to go too much into this, but a sensory descriptive analysis is a very elaborate method, and there are, I think, 1,200 data points behind this. So all the samples were served in triplicates, randomized, and then people just scored intensities of descriptors. And then this statistics will show you how much the different samples are correlating. If they are close to each other, they basically have the same flavor. And if they are far from each other, they have different flavors. And the flavor they are close to is the flavor that they correlate most. So you can see this Ethiopia 6 roast profile was more bitter than the Mexico 4, and then Mexico 4 was more fruity. And this blend, Mex 4, Colombia 5, was more chocolatey. So this is, of course, this is very useful statistics, but this is very expensive work. So you don't, and frankly, you don't need it. But it can be done. And sometimes this is when we do research, of course, this is what we do. And when we have clients where this is a project where they would prefer to see that there's no bias, then we're doing this because we get the data from people who doesn't even know anything about what the project is about or what the samples are. So all of these are objective scientific data. And sometimes people want that level of certainty, which is fine. And then this is what we do. But it all builds on correct conceptual data collection first. If you're not doing your fundamental distinction and data collection first, the data are just noise. Okay. Yeah. So it's difficult to talk about the SCA 2004 cupping form because we haven't really been able to get our hands on data sets. So you can see here the only thing that so I've tried to kind of get some data from some data set. You can see here recently I got an email from my friend in Lebanon, 12th of June, and he said, from your experience, are the below numbers viable? I mean, when I buy green coffee, I look at the scoring from the supplier, yet after roasting, we started to score them in-house. The variation difference is big looking at our scores versus supplier scores. Please advise on the reasons behind the big difference. This is ridiculous, right? So, this is, none of them actually made it above specialty, and the supplier suggested this. And then you could say, but are they calibrated? Are they even calibrated? Just a second. So that's a valid counter claim here. Are they calibrated? Are they trained? So okay, but this is just if the method can leave you with these numbers without really understanding why, or if you risk creating these numbers without having a built-in system to understand why or what to improve, then that's not very good for the system in the first place. So what I did was I took some data from the SCA Coffee Freshness Handbook, because that's public data. That's great. It was from a freshness study. And I noticed there's not a lot of data in the beginning, which is okay because coffee peaks after a few weeks anyway. So I took the data, I think was day 14 or something like that. So that's 2 weeks old coffee. That's great. That's pretty good quality from a roast of a freshness perspective. And here I had a lot of data points. 16 coppers scored the same coffee. And so if quality is an objective feature of the product, as it's claimed to be, then you can do something in statistics called a parameter estimate. So a parameter estimate is, given all your data about what you're trying to estimate, how reliable can I estimate this parameter? And the thing is, you can see here, this is coppers who self-identify as one who cups 3 or more times per week and scores the coffee based on the SCAA quality assessment form. So I don't know how many of you are using the SCA cupping form 3 or more times per week. This is people with a lot of experience. 16 people using it more than 3 times per week. This is really hardcore coppers. So the question is, how well are they able to estimate the quality of the coffee? So you can see here, first of all, you can see that they are really all over the place. That's a bit worrying, right? But if we calculate the 95% confidence interval, and first of all, we can see the average. The import score was 83.25, but the average score quality was 78.6. So 80, if it's below 80, it's not specialty. So it's really worrying that the average is below 80. But what about then the 95% confidence interval? And this is a statistics parameter estimate where you are estimating with 95% confidence where the true mean lies given the data that you have. And you can see not even the upper part, the most positive hope for this coffee is 81.7, given the data that the coppers created, and it's still far from the import score. This is really bad news for the method. Normally, we just need like 10 coppers either. Wouldn't you say that 10 is actually a pretty good panel? Sometimes 8 if they create really good data, but we always recruit 12, and if we get 12, then that's amazing. So 16, that's actually too much because we have narrow enough confidence intervals if we just have 10 people. So 16 should be really spot on if the method was good. So So that's one problem, right? One problem is that it seems like it's predicting this very bad. The other problem, and this is what I think pisses us off a bit, is that the problem is something that we see everywhere, which is you have a report with perfect chemical data analysis, perfect chemical measurement. Everything is perfect when it comes to the chemical aspect of the document. But when it comes to the sensory, we just do something, right? It's as if people are not taking sensory methodology seriously. So we'll just do something. We don't need to be that strict. We don't need to do exactly what's needed. We don't need to this is the fluffy stuff, right? That's the subjective, fluffy world anyway. So we can just do something. And this is something that we unfortunately see not only in papers such as the freshness study, but also scientific publications, which is really annoying. And so you can divide the scientific literature about the SCA cupping form into two different categories. One category is one where they are just using the SCA cupping form as a sensory endpoint. So can we predict the quality of coffee based on this chemical analysis? Where we just can, no, you can't, because quality doesn't exist as a scientific fact. So all those papers should never have been published. Okay, that was the first category. The next category of scientific papers with the SCA cupping form is papers that are looking into the methodology of the SCA cupping form. That's a much more interesting, because we are critical about the method. So let's see how they go about analyzing the methodology about the cupping form. But also notice it's a bit ironic that the sensory experience, that's the whole point of what we're doing. What we're doing as a specialty coffee community is we are trying to create great sensory experience. Isn't it a bit ironic and worrying that we are so confused about how to handle it? That what we've seen from SCAA and these data is just all over the place, and from a method perspective, really just a joke. And when we then, even the scientists, if they are not sensory scientists, can help us. And there's a big confusion even in the scientific community on what is sensory science, if not just something we can just do without being too serious. So what does that mean for us as a community in what does it mean for our executive skills and possibilities and planning if we are not clear where we are going and why? Because this is where we're all going, right? So I think it means that we are lost, but at a great speed and at a huge cost. So what does science say about the SCA 2004 quality score system? And here I just want to go through a few things. First of all, you need to know something fundamental about research design and statistics, because the confusion actually is at a very deep level of this. So what's the point about statistics? The point about statistics is that you want to say something about a background population. That's the whole point. And you are using a sample, because you can't go and measure, if you want to know the average height of a segment in a population, you can't walk around the whole country. It's a waste, because you can just make a sample. But you need to make sure that the sample is representative for what you want to investigate. So you can see statistics is all about making sure, deciding what is it what I want to know, and then take a small sample that is representative enough for you to be able to draw a conclusion based on the sample. So you use probability theory to handle the sample so that you can be allowed to say something about the background population that you're trying to estimate something about. And I just found this slide from 2008 when I was teaching medical research design. And so there's a lot of steps in it when you're working with medical research, but really the point is just this. Okay, so just remember this on the next slides, right? That this is the point. You're only allowed to say something about the population if you can kind of make it probable that what you're doing here is relevant for the background population. So yeah. So representative sampling assures that inferences and conclusions can reasonably be extended from the sample to the population as a whole. This is not my words. This is when you go to Wikipedia article about statistics. And even I asked ChatGPT, because I remember this from when I took biostatistics in 1998, that there's even different, this is so ingrained in statistics that there's specific symbols where you differentiate the population notation from the sample notation. So when you try to estimate the population notation, this is how this is the symbol. So this is not new. This is the fundamentals of statistics, right? So now I have a few small examples where I would invite you to think with me. Because now I'm going to show you some examples that will help you understand the criticism that we have of the existing literature looking into the SCA literature. So first of all, let's imagine a small research project here with statistics. I want to establish the mean height and the variation in height among boys in the 6th grade in Denmark. So when you estimate something about a population, it's typically the mean and the variation. That's the two parameters that are interesting, because you need to know where it is, and you need to know how much variation you see in the population. That's the two things. And that's also why that's what you saw here, right? Variance, that's two different ways of looking at the variations. So that's what we want to know. So we want to know the mean and the variation. And that's quite fortunate, because my youngest, he is in 6th grade and he's a boy. So I'll just take him, because he satisfies what I want to know. And luckily his best friend is in the same same class, so I can also take him, because now I've got two, so I can establish the mean and the variation. What's the problem here, if there's any? Sorry? Sorry. There's not enough. That's one thing. But another thing also is that it's not only the number, because if I just took all of them in the same class, we would have 25, and I could take the class. They have two. They're split in two, so I could actually get 50. So that's now I'm getting close to something that works, right? But the next question is also, but yeah, perhaps you have a lot from the same school or the same school district, but you said you wanted to know in Denmark. So it's not only in the numbers, it's actually also how it represents what you want to say something about. So perhaps we can get away with 30, but if they are chosen randomly from whole Denmark, we might have less. So it's not only the number, it's the number, but it's not enough. It's the number plus how it's selected. Otherwise, you can't extrapolate to the whole population. So that's two very important points. But can you see, this is pretty simple, right? And I even tested this with Jacob, and he's not very fond of science at all or math, but he figured this out in 2 minutes. So even my son, who is not that interested in science at all, and he's got no idea what statistics is, he could just, no, that doesn't work because you don't, well, okay. So this is really fundamental. Oh, yeah, no, I forget to, this is another important point, because now I have these two numbers, and then I put them into the state-of-the-art way of calculating it, right? So this is the state-of-the-art maths behind this. So it's a bit intimidating to see it like this. Oh, there's a lot of numbers, and I don't know, right? So it doesn't. The methodology in math is irrelevant if you have your error at a lower level. And then I have to credit this to Esben. It's a project that was conceived while packing and roasting. at Contra because he heard about something called tooth fairy science. And I thought that is an amazing project. And you have to tell me why it's an amazing project in a second. So this is another research project. And it's real data. It is data I have collected. And I have asked people to only give truthful estimates. This is not a joke. This is not, it's not, I'm not doing this for fun. I'm asking you to tell me how much money has put down, real money. I mean, money, right? You can calculate it, you can feel them, they are there. How much money has been put down by the tooth fairy in your household? No joke, real money, real data. And distributed the survey, and you can see this is all the data points. I think there's more than 100 something. I have that, you can see that later in the very elaborate statistics I've made. So you can see this is all the data points, right? Total amount received, where do you live? Europe, South America, you can see Asia, Australia, and so on. How many children do you have in your household? Do you live in the countryside? What kind of house do you have, and so on? And then I've created 243 lines of Python code to do statistics, to state-of-the-art statistics. So I've done linear regression with p-value calculations, correlation matrices. You can see it's 114 data points. That's a pretty big data set. And then you can do ANOVA analysis, which is where you're trying to categorize for dependent parameters. So you can see here, the tooth fairy clearly favors people in big houses. So the tooth fairy is doing a reverse Robin Hood. The tooth fairy is not a very nice person, actually. The tooth fairy gives more money to people who already has more money. And if you look, if the tooth fairy has geographical preferences, the tooth fairy is favoring people in Europe and North America and hardly give anything to people in Africa. So the point is, okay, there's money put down around the world. We can get real data on this. And we can even do statistical hypothesis testing, linear regression, ANOVA analysis, correlation matrices. We can do the most advanced stuff on a real data set. But what's wrong here? And you can't answer. What's wrong here? There's something wrong. It's unreal. So you are questioning in philosophy. Sorry.
It's based on beliefs. Let's say that.
Yes. So in philosophy, you would say you are questioning the ontological status of the object of investigation. So the ontological, that means what does it mean that it exists? What is the meaning of existence of this object? So this is a perfect picture for research for the research papers in the Q grading. And as part of writing Ida did the writing of the dissertation. I'm not trying to take credit for that, but we worked together on this part of it. That's fair enough to say, Ida, right? So I was really going deep into these also because I found it very interesting to look into those pieces of papers, because we've been criticizing this methodology for many years. So wonder what other scientists would say. So the first thing that you see is cluster analysis. It looks like the consistency of sensory analysis of coffees using Q graders. Consistency, that must be something with the estimate of the variance in the population, right? That's interesting. That's what I requested. And it seems like they've used the most advanced statistics, right? Cluster analysis and averages and standard deviation. They've got it. It's like, you know, we've got it, right? We've got all these things. And then there's another one, adherence and concordance among Q graders in the sensory analysis of coffee. That's also something with And here they are using, yeah, so also here you can see really advanced stuff, and here they are even questioning if sensory data is normally distributed, and actually we can't assume that, so we are using something called non-parametric statistics, which doesn't assume a background distribution at all. So very advanced introduction into sensory statistics methodology. And then they are doing all the most advanced stuff, right? So this again, we are seeing really advanced things, right? Really advanced things. And then propositions of the optimal number of Q graders and R graders. Here they are using bootstrap resampling to estimate the variance among Q graders, so that given the variance, we can see how many we need. Amazing sound. It sounds like an amazing project, right? And here we've got very beyond subjectivity, the limit of accuracy of Q graders. Again, with cluster analysis and a lot of really advanced statistics. Descriptive copy and a rapid coffee flavor profiling method using specialty coffee associations, copying protocol. So here they're looking into if this can be used as such as a substitute for a descriptive analysis. And also here, SCA has made a project as part of the new value system to see if coppers in general, if there's a big variation on what they do. PCA, really again cluster analysis, the most advanced statistics. But I've highlighted something. 4 Q graders, 6 Q graders, 6 Q graders, 7 Q graders, 7 Q graders, 8 coppers. We are back to the problem of me measuring the height because they're Q graders, right? So they satisfy the inclusion criteria, just as my son satisfies the inclusion criteria of being a 6th grader male. So they basically invited their eight friends, right? But they are Q graders, yeah. But you can't say anything about Q graders as a background population if you don't specify the relevance of the sample. They completely miss this point. So can you see how the tooth fairy is a great, well, that's actually, it's two different problems. This is the most fundamental problem. If you know anything about statistics and have any intuition about statistics, this is just a catastrophe to make so that's the one problem. And it's a huge problem. There's absolutely no way out of this problem. The other problem is then the ontological status of what you are investigating. That's a different problem. So you can throw all the most advanced statistics after data about objects that doesn't exist, such as tooth fairies. Oh, sorry. The most advanced thing, but if you don't have your foundation straight in terms of both sample size estimation and representativeness, and also if what you're investigating exists at all, there's no guarantee that things exist just because you do advanced mathematics. That's the point. You'll get the slides afterwards. Okay. So also, this is from Ida's PhD dissertation. One of the things that also annoys us a bit is that something new is created. Why don't we use the good thing that already works? And the good thing that already works is Rosemary Pangborn's model from 1965. And you understood it the first 10 minutes in the presentation, right? That her distinctions is those discriminative, descriptive, and hedonic. And so it's old thoughts. And also hanging out with Ida, it was very clear to me very early that you can't mix the descriptive and the preferences. It's two completely different worlds. One is with scientists in a lab with highly trained assessors, and consumer studies is done with people having a cigarette while they drink the coffee. It's two completely different things. It's got nothing to do with each other, right? Not even the setting is the same. Completely different data. And because it is, the way you collect them also look completely different. Here you need to be a trained assessor, and you are putting kind of your lines here, the intensities, only intensities, of course not preferences, because that's this step, right? We've got we need to have some customers. And then you can see here, a consumer study is basically this liking scale. That's what you need to know, nothing more. Of course, some demographic data to correlate, but the sensory data is actually this. This is just extra. If you can, because consumers, there's a concept called naive. Consumers are naive, which means they don't know anything about anything. They know what they like, and that's what you want to know. They are naive. So if you, in a consumer study, plans just 2 seconds of training, it's not a consumer study. So you need to just kind of get the preferences of the consumer, and then just kind of, if something here makes sense, tick it off. This way we might see that there are perhaps some of your impressions that correlates with your preferences, and then we can add that to the statistics. So can you see how it's two extremely different ways of collecting, and you are asking about completely different things. So what about the new SCA value assessment system? Because what it says on their website is it's scientific. That's the first thing. And we've talked enough about science now to know what is sensory science, what is statistics, and so on. So that's the first thing. It's scientific. That's great. That's what we hoped. It's specific, it's sustainable, and it's special, and it's yours to use. Well, if it's useful, let's use it. So, well, okay, if it's scientific, then this is what it needs to. It needs to not mix these, and it needs to contain them. So let's look at the forms. That's weird, right? Because shouldn't that be consumer? Have you seen any descriptive analysis form where CATA is used? Can that be used? Yeah, it's mainly used for consumers. Rate all that apply. Yeah, rate. So you're using scales. So check all that applies. Is typically something you see on the consumer side because they are naive, right? And then you can see here one of the things that really struck me because I was kind of a few days ago, I kind of wanted to go through the whole thing again, and it struck me the effective form, which should be the consumer part of it, right? The hedonic effective form. What do you think about it? It says impression of quality. But what is quality? There are so many weird assumptions. So first of all, it's questionable. That's a bit the tooth fairy, right? That comes in here. What do you mean quality? And then you have a big problem if a consumer asks you what it is that you want to know, because then you have to educate them to fill it out. And if you educate them, you start to introduce possible bias, because it depends on what you tell them. But the whole point about a consumer study is that you ask, and you have to assume that they are naive. So you have to use questions that there could be no question about what it is. So it seems like it's not new. It's just actually, it creeps in that the old quality concept from the old model is still what is just getting a bit of a revamp here, calling it science where it isn't. This is violating directly what Rosemary Pangborn thought of the distinction between the three phases. You're starting to mix. All of a sudden, you are introducing something weird, the quality concept for consumers. They don't know what it is. So that's really a big problem. And also another thing is quality of acidity. Well, I thought acidity as a score was intensity. So quality of acidity, it's not what's that? Is it how much you like the intensity, or is it So many weird assumptions. I have got no idea, and we've been in the business for a while, so I don't know how to fill this out. What do you mean the quality? Is it how much I like the intensity, or is it the perception of the acidity? What does it mean? What is a good perception or a bad perception? There are so many weird, and the quality of sweetness. This shows that they are still stuck in the old quality scoring, but try to make it scientific by kind of showing that it's separate, but it's not, right? It's all over the place. If you are mixing this quality and the consumer, that it doesn't go well together. Ida, is there anything that springs to your mind? Have I covered it?
So many things in one form. Like the first thing in sensory is that we make it as simple as possible for the
Here, you know exactly what to do. Also because you are here, it's trained assessors, but even though they are a trained expert, it's still simple, right? And also as a consumer, you know how much do you like it? That's easy to say, right? You know if you like things.
all your attention should go to how this taste.
So that's actually it's all about the paper and not the product. And that's actually why I think this is so. All these quality things is something that squeezes in between us and the product and our customers. And the whole point was that it should just be the product and the customers should be in our forefront, and we don't need somebody to confuse us. So all of these pieces of paper, it's something that squeezes in between us understanding our products and our consumers. It confuses us, and if we are confused, we can't act. So it needs to be, it's a really good point, it needs to be intuitive. Even for the trained, it needs to be simple, and particularly for consumers. So if there's a lot of things you don't understand here, it's just, what's this, right? But the most important point is that they are mixing the hedonic and the descriptive. Okay, yeah. So, and there's another thing. So the idea of the idea, and which is a great idea, to consider specialty as products with special features that are valued, right? So it's not a commodity. That's the idea behind the coffee the assessment, the value assessment, that it's got some special features, so it's not a commodity. That's a great idea, and they talk about recent advances in sensory and in economic science, as if we are jumping on a ship that is kind of sailing now. Recent advances in sensory and economics. Let's jump on it, right? Well, if we look at it, the sensory, that was back in 65, and the economics, that's back in 1933, that microeconomics that made these distinctions. So it's not that we'll miss the boat if we don't do it now. So it's just the sound method that is already existing. Why don't we use the thing that is already existing rather than trying to invent something new with a lot of assumptions that are unclear? And the reason why you've got classics such as microeconomics and sensory science is that they work and they are clear, and everybody understands the assumptions behind, so that we can use them as foundation to create good data. So, and that is also, and that I only learned that from reading Ida's dissertation, which is that there's been, since Rosemary Pangborn came out with these elaborate methods, because it is heavy statistics to do it the way they do at the universities. Even though the understanding is pretty simple, it's pretty difficult and time consuming. So there are some guilds that has been formed by people with scientific background to bring rapid methods. So they have created some rapid methods that are fast and cheap for the industry to use, so that they can the industry can create scientific data with rapid methods. Why don't we use those? Why do we have to come up with something all the time that is unclear? So the effective values are consumer preferences, not expert opinion. So it's very important that the hedonic values are scored by the consumers and not by the coffee professionals, as with the old the old system. So yeah, quality of acidity and sweetness. That I just say consumers are naive, so you can't do that. And then there's another thing, bitterness is not on. So I think that the perception of bitterness is so important for who likes coffee, and might be one of the most. So acidity and bitterness, that's my assumption. Those might be the two most fundamental sensory attributes to get acceptance or rejections from different customer segments. So Starbucks customers love bitterness, hate acidity. Hipsters hate bitterness, loves acidity. So from all the flavors, I think this is the strongest impressions that will make you go, "Ooh, this is nice coffee," or "What is this?" Is that a fair? So bitterness should be relevant enough to add to the form, and it's really weird that it's not on the form. I might have missed a comment, but even if there's a comment, I wouldn't agree. So okay, so I was actually wrong in that. That's great.
It is only if it is or not, but there is any intensity scale as you can see.
So okay,
Notes about it.
so you don't score the intensity, right? It's
Yeah,
just
frankly, I don't see the point why you are not.
no, because it's the intensity of the bitterness. If you want to compare hipster coffee and what would it take to tick it off or not, right? Yeah, it's more relevant than sweetness that has its own scale. So what's the background of choosing these or not? And it's just okay, yeah. It's still a beta, but they've been working on it for 3-4 years, and it's just why is it so complicated? Yeah, and then there's something that's interesting, because when you read the document, it's very unclear if the effective piece is actually designed to be scored by the professionals themselves or the audience. Sometimes they say, yeah, then you can send the papers to the to consumers, but how would consumers know how to score quality if they don't know what it is? So that's a bit confusing. And then also sometimes it says that in order to not introduce bias, all coppers have to fill out the descriptive form and the physical and not before doing the effective. But I thought the effective was for the consumers. Why would you say that you try to avoid bias by not scoring that before the other? But why, and this is again, this picture, it's great, right? You wouldn't make that error at the university, kind of who fills this? Is it an expert or is it a consumer? Who is? And sometimes experts fill this form out, and sometimes it's not separated. And if it's not separated, it's not science, because it doesn't build on Rosemary's ideas. That you try to score what the expected customer would think. And of course, that's a hypothesis, but I think it's a weak system where this is where it ends. So I think they should kind of, okay, we've been working with this SCA 2004 protocol. We need to make sure to completely show people what is a consumer study and give them the tools to do it. And then we can say, but sometimes you can also make a small, inexpensive, because right now it seems like they think that this small, inexpensive is the reason that now they are working with the real scientific distinction framework, which is the category error. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's confusing that they call it science, that then they're working with science, when they actually take a small, fast, basically kitchen thing as a substitute of a real consumer, rather than spending the time to tell people what would it look like to make a real consumer study. And sometimes, of course, you can try to estimate what would happen if you don't have the resources. And I think in the document, this should be clearer. but I understand that of course you can do some kitchen tasting and have some hypothesis without consumer data, but it shouldn't substitute the principle behind consumer studies. Okay, and other weird things is that they still have a guidelines on how to roast the coffee. Well, wasn't that the idea with the old SCA that you are trying to create a quality assessment? But this is not a quality assessment. This is we are trying to do a descriptive analysis and a consumer study. So the roast degree should align with the customer segment you are trying to address. Why would you take an arbitrary roast degree when you, for example, are developing a product for a light roast Scandinavian? Or even if you're making a Starbucks 35 Actron, why would you taste it as 63? That's the color reading. So it seems like there's so much baggage from the old system, which makes it just not scientific. Yes, so that's a really good. So the way I would answer that question is that I think the whole quality grading system is based on what you suggested first in the green coffee buying space. And an extension of that is an attempt, just like Ida mentioned, it's an attempt to imagine consumer segments. But the problem is that the whole point with sensory science is that there's so many different opinions. And the differences between opinions, those are the interesting data. So if you try to imagine some universal quality thing, you're creating a lot of elaborate data that is not predicting anything because you are not connecting it to the last step. And then you can say, yeah, but it's so general still and it's very early and then, yeah, but then just keep those things where they were starting at the green coffee, and please you give us some methods all the way down to the consumer, rather than just saying something that's developed in one context and just spread it out if there's no problem in doing so. So, and that's why I'm trying to I don't accept a sensory scientific methodology as such if there's not a very clear conceptual way of getting liking data from consumer segments. If it doesn't go all the way there, it's not aligned with Rosemary's. And then you can say, yeah, but there's still, and there's, yeah, that's okay. But then please be clear about that, right? Because there's something important missing if we want to make this actionable for roasteries. So it's a category error to take something that was originally developed on green, and then cafes are taking Q-grader courses. Why are cafe owners doing that? If it's something that doesn't describe their local situation at all. So the problem is that it's developed and it is spread to areas where it shouldn't be. And the question is what should we have instead? And I think Rosemary Pangborg already told us. So why don't we just do it? And then, yeah, there might be steps in between, but we can't do that in expense of where the tires hit the road, which is where people are buying, putting down money. And then also there's also an elaborate formula to convert the old scoring system to some new numbers. It's just, what's this? What's the use? Again, overcomplicating things. And then there's a combined form so that you can score intensities and preferences in the same on the same form. And again, I'm a bit confused. The same form? I thought this was consumers. So again, yes, if this is a quick method of an expected audience, then please tell me, when do we do the consumer studies? If this is so, it's just reading it. It seems like it's really soaked into the old way of quality thinking. If you really read how the data are collected, and the unclear distinction between real consumer studies and then this quality form that could be or could not be filled out by the experts themselves or some customers. So the point is, a theory doesn't need to be directly wrong to be bad. And here I feel that we are a bit too close to to an overcomplicated system. So you can see a really good example of this is the solar system. You can explain the solar system as being either the sun is in the center or the earth is in the center. And the problem is that both of these are scientifically true, because you can make mathematical models that explains both models. So if you assume that the earth is in the center, this is the math that can describe exactly when each of these heavenly bodies will be at different places, and you can predict it. It's perfect. But this is also true. You can also use this, where if you assume the sun is in the center, you have another system. So the question is, which of these two systems would you prefer to do your math in? They are both true. None of them are wrong. And we just feel that this is something called Occam's razor in theory of science, where if you have a phenomena and you've got a simple explanation and a complicated explanation, choose the simpler one. That's Occam's point. But it seems like the last 50 years in the specialty coffee business, people have made a reverse Occam. If you have a simple and a complicated, choose the complicated. And we don't feel the new value assessment system is kind of breaking that proud tradition. So we are really trying to bring models that are as simple as possible, and we actually feel that, or at least I feel, Rosemary Pangborn did exactly this. The first 10 minutes, we felt in this, right? There was nothing we didn't understand, right? Okay, the differences need to be big enough to be relevant. We can kind of describe, is it fruity or is it nutty? Which thermo empties first, right? No weird thing. The second you start to talk about quality, bing, you're here. Because quality is such a weird thing. It's tooth fairies, right? This is tooth fairy and unicorn land. And this, a lot of too much education is spending too much time here. So what about your time, right? Where do you think that you will have more time for your family as a business owner? Here or there?